We are back to work after a 1-week Disney vacation. I don't really know if walking 9 miles a day constitutes a vacation, but it was a lot of fun had by all, the wife and kids. We had a blast. I love it myself. Our 2009 Harley-Davidson Road King with the transmission issue. Bearing housing here on the right has kind of gone bad. We have a lot of end play in the main shaft, which is causing a knocking noise in the transmission, which is working its way into the primary, which if you didn't see part 1, go back and watch that, and you'll know what's going on. Anyway, you're going to follow along as we remove the exhaust and the transmission, get the transmission on the bench, disassemble it, and we'll see if there's any other issues once we get in there. I don't really think we'll have any other issues, but you never know. So follow along and we'll get to work on this episode of Bill on Bikes Part 2, the 09 Road King transmission project. Let's go. Just want to point out our bad bearing here. As you can see, the shaft moving back and forth is end play in this, which shouldn't be there. And also, here's some of the remnants. If you can pick up on these metal filings in the light, I'll kind of move this around a little bit. You can see all the little metal filings. As the bearing continues to wear and deteriorate, you'll start getting small filings like that. But luckily, we've caught this before the bearing actually blows and causes bigger issues. So we'll continue to remove the transmission now, and we'll get it on the bench. All right, we have our 6-speed transmission on the bench. I just wanted to point out a few things. First, counter shaft, main shaft, gears 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on the counter shaft, and then we have the corresponding gears on the main shaft, with the main drive gear or 6th gear still in the transmission. That stays in the housing. Our shifter drum, the long fork is for the main shaft shifter fork, and the shorter counter shaft one is for the 3rd and 4th and 1st and 2nd gear shifter fork. You'll also notice I've put in a couple screw extractors in the shafts. We put these in. We'll unscrew these to loosen the shafts and pull the shaft out. That's how you get the shifter forks out. And I also wanted to point out one other thing on the later 6-speed. So this is an 09. The very early ones didn't have this, but you'll notice there's a slight step on this shaft. It steps up, and that is so when we have the inner primary race, it goes down on the shaft and it's pressed on. Normally we set this to about 125 thousandths on a 6-speed from the end of the main drive gear. What happened on the earlier 5-speeds was even the early 6-speeds, as these would actually walk, and I had this happen to me in Sturgis one year. And what will happen is it will walk this way over time. Now this doesn't always happen. It would happen, 1 out of 1,000. It may not even be that high, but it did happen. And it would run into the main seal, eat up the main seal inside the main drive gear and cause it to leak. Yes, so this inner race for the inner primary, it actually walked on me one year when I was in Sturgis. I had built this 2005 Deuce that I had ridden out in Sturgis and built this really cool custom bike. And it started leaking oil on my first ride through Spearfish Canyon, which is kind of embarrassing. But what it was, this race walked on the shaft, went into the main drive gear seal, and started leaking. I went over to a shop called Black Hills Choppers, I believe it was. Told them the situation. Told them I was a mechanic. I could fix it. Could I borrow the tools? They didn't have a bench for me, but they let me use the tools, and I fixed it outside. And by the end of the day, I was back on the road and enjoyed a good week. Prior to that, if it had been leaking, I was out of I probably went through 5 or 10 ounces of oil by the time I got through Spearfish Canyon, which is a lot of oil. I mean, the transmission only hold on that year was like 20 ounces. So that wouldn't have been a good situation. Anyway, it was nice enough those guys got me going. They'd let me use their tools, and I got myself going, but I used their tools. And down the road I went. Anyway, these transmissions are pretty stout. Most of the gears are spherical cut. That's to keep them quiet and you know, helps with the strength slightly. Not a bad transmission. When you start putting a lot of horsepower into them, yeah, there's some weak links. I know there's some shops on the M8s now that are going and they're saying the gears are too hard, and they're actually sending the gears out and having them re-hardened, but hardened softer. They're claiming that the gears are too hard and brittle. I personally don't agree with that, and I think it is a huge mistake, especially liability-wise. You're going and you're changing the formula of the hardness of these gears, and you've come up with some formula on your own, or you believe somebody has some formula, and you're softening the gears, man, you're holding yourself open to an incredible lawsuit. But, you know, that's me, and what do I know, right? Anyway, and you'll also, I just want to show you, you'll see how much play we have in the main shaft, and that bearing is starting to fail, and we're losing the bearing cage, and you start getting more clearance, and that's why we have about, end play, we had about 25 thousandths lateral end play, and we should have 0. So the counter shaft doesn't have any, has a little side to side, that's normal, but not where you can rock it around. So I'm going to disassemble the tranny, press out the bearings, put it back together. I'm using a Baker transmission rebuild kit. Harley doesn't offer one that I know of. Even on the newer ones, I still don't think they do. You have got to piece everything together. So we'll use their kit. Comes with all the gaskets and the bearings and everything that I need, and we'll put it back together. So stay tuned. Ready to install the inner primary cover now. We have a new inner primary bearing, new seal installed. You'll also want to notice that I didn't remove the main drive gear nut until I had the transmission main shaft installed. You don't want to do any removal of the nut or the sprocket without the transmission in place, because what will happen is you can damage the bearing or actually even the case. So you got to be very careful with that. It needs that support of the main shaft before you want to remove this nut. Have our Screaming Eagle compensator diaphragm springs installed. I also want to clarify something from the first video on torque specs. Where this has the Screaming Eagle diaphragm spring compensator, we will be torquing this to 175 foot-pounds. I'm not sure that was clarified in the first video. If this was an original 09 with this compensator, this would only get torqued to 140 foot-pounds. I just want to make sure I clarify that in case anybody's doing this on their own and they end up using the wrong torque spec. So that's that. We're going to start putting this back together. Also 5 new sealing screws. I've already put a little oil on the O-rings. Those are a one-time use. You replace them every single time. Relatively cheap from Harley. And obviously our new inner primary gasket is installed and ready to go. So let's get the primary cover on and get moving. All right, we have the transmission all back together. The new bearings are in. I just want to point out a couple of things. You might notice some paint marks that I use prior to disassembly, and I didn't mention this before. The reason I do that is some of these parts are interchangeable. In other words, you can flip them 180 degrees the opposite way. Not something you really want to do with a transmission that has mileage on it, because these parts are worn into one another. and you can end up with a louder transmission if you start switching parts around. May not shift as smoothly as it was. So you always want them going back in the same direction as when they were disassembled. Also, here's our bad bearing. You can see this is the culprit. The cage is actually split, and this is why we had too much end play in our main shaft. So all new snap rings, new bearings are in. I have the new gasket in position. We're going to mount this in the tranny and into the transmission case, and we'll start the reassembly. Well, the transmission's done. All we got to do is take it off the bench, clean her up, and take it for a test ride. Here's the culprit, the bearing that we could hear rattling around. You can see the cage is broken. It's actually falling apart here. Here's a piece of it. Just to recap, you know, these 6-speed transmissions, the first Harley 6-speeds came out on the 2006 Dyna models, and then in 07 all models had the 6 speeds as far as the big twins go. Pretty stout transmission. There's been a few upgrades over the years. You know, the later, like this one's considered more of a Gen 2, and then more of the Gen 3 is what's in the current M8s. And they've made subtle changes along the way, like the spring-loaded gear on the M8s to help eliminate some of that gear rattle you hear, which these were pretty, you know, well known for. Anyway, good transmission, can handle, you know, basic big bore kits, cam upgrades, but when the problem comes in when you want to start putting in some big cubic inches, you want to have big horsepower, you start eliminating the compensating sprocket that I showed in the first video, the compensating sprocket from the Screaming Eagle. A lot of guys will go like the Dark Horse Man of War, more of a direct drive. Baker has something. I think maybe, who else? There's some other companies that have. I try to avoid them, honestly, because now you're taking all those impulses from the engine, all that horsepower, traveling through into the clutch hub and directly into that main shaft, into the transmission, and it just pounds them. I've seen these gears completely sheared. For, you know, now that's in like a 131 in an M8, and the guy's really pounding it. He's putting out quite a bit of horsepower, and he wanted to go, he get rid of the belt and swapped out to a rear chain in the back. Some of those upgrades don't even have push drives. Stock applications, mild cams, like I said, big bores like this, a 110. You're not going to really have an issue with these bearings. Yeah, that happens, but not very often. Other than that, it's a great transmission. If you want to build the big horsepower, and you know, you want to get going, you know, 145, 150 horse or more, look at the Baker setup. They have straight cut gears. I mean, that thing's basically bulletproof. It's that's a hell of a transmission. Expensive, but if you're spending all that money, why not spend the money on the transmission? So I'm going to get this cleaned up, go take it for a test ride. Thanks for watching us on Bill on Bikes. Make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. Check us out on Facebook, Bill on Bikes also. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.